The Carpenter and the Cradle, A History Weaver Adventure, Book 1, by Connie Worden. Read by the author. Chapter 1. It would be a full moon night. The pale orb, looking twice its regular size, was just beginning to edge its way over the rim of the eastern mountains. The chilled air, sweeping down the mountains to the valley, erased any memory of the heat of the day. The purpose of the assemblage around the council fire was the boy, lying in the dirt under a scrubby pine, a few short lengths from the fire. The cords binding his hands and feet were barely visible in the flickering light of the fire, but he felt them, acutely. Sharper than the rope's bite in his wrists and ankles was their humiliation that had entered into his soul. Boy, I've called him, but properly he was a man. He had seen 15 summers turning into winters, turning back into summers again. The glint in his eyes, also barely visible in the flickering light, told of the proud realization of his own attainment to manhood, and of the indignity to which the manhood was being subjected. Lady Cromarty was the only witness to the accident, if that's what it was, but even she didn't see it. From Eversley Road, which ran past the bookshop, came the sounds of a car rapidly accelerating, tires crunching on gravel, a scream, a heart-stopping thud, and an engine gunning as the car raced off. Lady Cromarty knew what had happened as plainly as if she had seen it. There was nothing at all the matter with her hearing, even if she had reached, well, that certain time of life when some didn't hear as well as they once had. She threw aside the Agatha Christie she was reading, nearly toppling the vase of plastic flowers on her antique side table, and, in her haste to arrive on the scene, forgot to take her cane. It wasn't that she needed a cane, she walked just as well without one, but the stick added a certain dignity to her bearing, she felt. A crumpled figure, it looked like no more than a small bundle of clothing, lay huddled in the ditch. Lady Cromarty approached the figure. Awkwardly, she slid down the wet grass of the ditch with a great internal trembling, fearing the worst. The unimaginatively named Beaver Row Books, on the end of Eversley Road before it runs into untouched forest, is the only bookstore in all of Beaver Row. The locals call it simply, and even more unimaginatively, the bookshop. Though Beaver Row can hardly boast of its business district, Eversley Road is not the center of it. On Eversley Road, in addition to the bookshop, there is a cemetery, a horse pasture, and several acres of apple orchard surrounding an old barn. Beaver Row Books started off life in a rather more orthodox Beaver Row Main Street storefront, but the more orthodox rent for the more orthodox storefront ate up a greater share of the profits than the bookshop produced. As a result, Beaver Row Books now occupies, and has for the past 18 years, the ground floor of a 3-story Victorian-style monstrosity on a small acreage that Paul and April Eagles purchased for just a little more than the proverbial song. The second story houses the Eagles family, and the tenant, Lady Cromarty that is, lives up 2 flights of stairs on the top floor. Beaver Row Books is unique to Beaver Row not merely by virtue of its being the only bookstore in the village, but by having, as you can well imagine, the only person of title in all of Beaver Row living over it. It is, no doubt, a little unusual anywhere to have a Lady Cromarty living just above one's head and sharing one's drains and garbage bins. But in Canada, where titles do not grow thick on every bush, in fact, they don't grow on any bush, it must be considered highly extraordinary. And maybe this is as good a time as any to explain Lady Cromarty and how she came to be Lady Cromarty. The long and short of it is, Lady Cromarty decided she would become Lady Cromarty, and what Lady Cromarty decides will be, at least for Lady Cromarty. There was some slim rationale behind the decision. It is true that Lady Cromarty's mother would possess the rights to the title were she still living. The parents of Lady Cromarty, our Lady Cromarty, that is, had been made Sir Michael and Lady Cromarty for some invention or other considered sufficiently useful to wartime Britain to merit a knighthood for its creator. Our Lady Cromarty could tell you all about the invention, though few others can. I'm afraid I'm one of those who can't. Sir Michael and Lady Cromarty's daughter, Elizabeth, was born in London and was not quite 1 year old when Hitler invaded Poland and Britain found herself at war. Elizabeth and her mother boarded the first ship bound for the New World that would give them passage. Destination, Canada, to stay with Sir Michael's sister, Mrs. Taylor, for the duration of the war. Sir Michael was considered too vital behind the scenes to the war effort to be called up for action, but was nevertheless killed in a blitz on London. His wife, carrying their second child, died aboard ship from complications of losing the baby late term upon the shock of hearing of her husband's death. Elizabeth, on the other hand, was safely delivered to her destination and, as a result, grew up in Beaver Row with her Aunt Sophia and her aunt's Canadian husband, Graydon Taylor. Elizabeth's father and mother likely spoke with the same London, working-class accent that Sophia Taylor possessed, and there was no earthly reason Elizabeth shouldn't have grown up speaking like any average Canadian. But according to all living memory, she has spoken the King's English with the nearest approach to the royal accent that it was possible to glean entirely from broadcasts on the radio, or the wireless, as she still calls it. She had been plain Elizabeth Cromarty while she was growing up, but when she considered herself all grown up, she insisted on Miss Cromarty. As the years passed, and it began to look more and more unlikely that she would ever lose the Miss in her name, she simply appropriated her mother's title. The title was in no way a hereditary one, but after all, most Canadians know nothing of titles, and our Lady Cromarty was living in Canada. She silenced all questioners with, "It was my mother's title, and there's no reason it shouldn't be mine as well. And I suppose there is no reason it shouldn't be." So, Lady Cromarty she has been from that day to this. "Hello!" The call from the front of the bookshop was as ladylike as ever. Lady Cromarty did not yell, no matter the reason, but June thought she read a note of urgency in it. June was ensconced in an overstuffed armchair in the previously loved section of the store. She had her nose buried in an old copy of Jane Eyre, and she dropped it with reluctance when she heard Lady Cromarty's voice. "Hello? Lady Cromarty?" she called back, finding her way to the front of the store between piles of books that needed sorting. "Didn't you hear the accident?" Lady Cromarty demanded without ceremony as soon as June came into view. "Accident?" June was all at sea. She knew nothing that went on around her when she had a good book in her hands. "In the road, close by the bookshop. A young girl's been hit by an automobile. They didn't stop. In fact, from what I heard, I shouldn't be surprised if it was intentional. She's still alive, but she's unconscious. I must use your telephone to call an ambulance, but someone should stay with the girl. Where are your parents?" This rapid-fire explosion of speech was so out of character for Lady Cromarty that June flew into action at once without asking questions. She hadn't fully grasped the situation, but she understood the basics. She fired over her shoulder as she ran for the back office. "I'll grab the phone for you from the office. I'm the only one at home. That's why I'm minding the store. Mom took Gussie to swimming lessons and Dad drove July over to Ferns. I have no idea where Maylie is." She kept up her steady flow of words, raising her voice to be heard from the office until she was back with the bookshop's portable phone. "There you are." She passed it off to Lady Cromarty so quickly it was almost a toss. "Modern gizmos. What button do I push first?" Lady Cromarty grumbled at it. "The black one, at the top." June pushed it for her. "Now, just punch the numbers and it will ring through. While you're calling, I'll go stay by the girl." June was out the door before Lady Cromarty could answer her. "A young girl," Lady Cromarty had called the victim, and June had expected to find a little girl, perhaps because she associated being struck by cars with very small people who still had to learn road-crossing behavior. June was taken aback to find that the girl looked about her own age, 15, though she may have been anywhere from 13 to 18, June supposed. It was quite awful to see the slight figure lying so still in the ditch. The girl, with her limbs askew, was partially on her back and partially on her side, and June had a full view of her face. There were no visible injuries. There was no blood anywhere that June could see, but the girl's eyes were closed and she appeared unconscious. June checked quickly to make sure the girl was breathing. She was. June began breathing again herself. unaware till then that she'd been holding her own breath. June wouldn't have called the injured girl exactly pretty. Her face was thin and pale, though it was small wonder she was pale after the trauma. But there was something appealing about her looks. Maybe it was the wild mass of dark brown curls surrounding the pale face, or maybe it was the snub of a freckled nose in the center of it. June thought she looked like the kind of girl she could have made friends with, and the thought made quick tears spring to her eyes, though she willed them back. It might have been 10 minutes, or it was probably less. Time moved slowly for June on vigil, before Lady Cromarty joined her again. The two of them hovered uncertainly. There was nothing to be gained by watching over the unconscious girl like a pair of hawks, but on the other hand, there didn't seem to be anything else to do either. It caught them both by surprise when the girl opened her blue eyes, strikingly deep blue, and spoke 2 words. Then the almost translucent lids fell back over the deep blue eyes, and the questions Lady Cromarty and June began peppering the girl with remained unanswered. She had slipped back into oblivion. "Was she speaking English? Could you tell what she said?" June asked Lady Cromarty. "It sounded to me like Georgie Green," Lady Cromarty, who had been closer to the girl, guessed. "Georgie Green?" June said. "What do you make of it? Is it her own name, do you think, or was she talking about someone else?" "We have no way of knowing, do we?" Lady Cromarty answered tartly. "I suppose not," June said, chastened. She didn't waste time on any other idle speculations, at least not out loud. The ambulance arrived in under half an hour, and the 2 onlookers stood by helplessly while the medical attendants did their job. The police were slower, making an appearance only after the girl was already loaded in the ambulance. Lady Cromarty did her best to answer the questions put to her, though there wasn't much she could tell, and June had nothing to add. It was another 10 minutes before the police and the ambulance wailed off in the direction of the Cherryton Hospital, the hospital nearest Beaver Row, and Lady Cromarty and June were left alone to look at each other with question marks in their eyes. But there was no one to give them any answers.